different this time around. This coffee season. Farmers are in a different place than they were 4 years ago, and most of that's in a more challenging place. So we're dealing with more extreme weather. We're dealing with a downturn in the farm economy. Those are cycles. We're used to that, but with the current trade policies, we've turned a downward cycle into an absolute crisis.
Yeah. So I was reading about Mexico specifically. This goes through just the reciprocal impact on Iowa. I believe Mexico is the #1 market for Iowa pork, Iowa soybeans, and Iowa corn. So huge hit on this state and these farmers.
Yep. So thank you for being here.
Yeah.
We bought this farm in 2005. Let's keep walking. My husband Pat. We're a small farm. I grew up on a commodity farm in western Iowa. It was about 1,000-acre corn, soybean, cattle farm. A little bit smaller now as my parents retire and my brother and sister-in-law are just developing that farm. More beef than commodities now. But my family's bank failed in the price, the farm prices of the 80s. Yeah. Not the savings and loan piece, but the farm prices.
Yeah.
So I was very risk averse, and when I decided I wanted to start my own farm, I wanted to do it very small, low risk, low capitalization. So we do all retail agriculture here.
Meaning you sell?
We sell directly to
farmers
consumers.
markets?
Yeah, farmers markets, direct to customers. People buy our beef by the package. Some of them buy a whole beef, from the locker. And then I've worked in agriculture for 20 years off the farm, and we've been here since 2005. So this is really still a work in progress, but the most important part of this work in progress has been the partnership that Americans, the taxpayers, have invested in our farm through conservation programs. And I can talk more about that if you have questions. But essentially what it did was it by using the conservation programs, we were able to transition the farm into how it would work for us and then how it benefits. So we've hired dozens of kids over the years to help us. We spent tens and tens of thousands of dollars on the house, on the barn, on the ponds, turning the land into a grazing system and taking 60 acres of marginal row crop and put it into a grazing system so we can manage cattle through rotational grazing. So that's kind of what I wanted to share with you, is just, this is a success story about when smart public policy and innovative farmers come together, we can do amazing things. And we're in the middle of commodity agriculture. You drove down. This is not against commodity agriculture. It's in the middle of it, and we've had a great success with our neighbors, and it's not either or, it's a both and. So let's just walk a little bit more. We worked cattle this morning. We trained cows and banded last year's calves, fall calves, so we're still a little behind the 8 ball on getting that done. We should have done it about 6 weeks ago. But so we started by rehabilitating the barn. We use it for hay and some livestock stuff. What's interesting about where we're at right now in this transition in agriculture, so the story is that the family that built this farmstead in the 1930s, that they were in another place on the farm that had burned down. So in the 1930s, adding, they started over. So this is like a model farm in 1930 whatever. So in the barn are 5 draft horse stalls. And so that family was betting that the future of agriculture was going to be workhorses. And in 1930s, that's really when the Green Revolution started to kick off. And so what I like to say is worth that same pivotal moment is that the idea that we're going to keep doing agriculture exactly the way we're doing it now is like people betting on horses, when the future is tractors. And tractors is managing our farms to produce multiple benefits, not only goods and not only the products, but the services that the world needs. And so, I want to be part of that tractor future, not the workhorse past.
Explain something you said earlier. So you and your husband Pat and those who work with you are putting in the sweat equity. You you took the financial risk by investing in this farm.
Right.
You're making sure that you make a profit in who you sell to, but you also mentioned a partnership with the American taxpayer.
Right.
And I've heard you and Bob Leonard talk about for pennies a meal, we can allow farmers to make a profit and also provide the services you just described and then environmental services. Can you talk a little bit about what that means and the example that we see of that here on your farm?
Yeah, if we could just keep talking and walking. I want to take us up so that we get up so we can see a little bit more of the farm. We can see some of those investments that taxpayers have made.
Awesome. Great.
We point that out. But as we're walking, so we are this model of farming for us is wealth creation. And the vast majority of American agriculture is structured around wealth creation. You don't make a lot of money on an annual basis. Most farms in the United States, aren't paying the bills from their farm income. They're paying their bills from the off-farm income. There's a few farms, maybe a couple 100,000 farms out of 2 million farms that are strictly on-farm income.
What is off-farm income?
Off-farm income is any income that comes into the household that's not part of the farm.
Gotcha.
So I work full-time off the farm. Pat works full-time off the farm.
If you're teaching school, if you're
teaching school, if you're a firefighter,
that's all off-farm income. Gotcha.
if you work in the county FSA office at USDA, a lot of those staff in those county offices, because I worked for 8 years as a part-time employee at USDA. I was on the Farm Service Agency State Committee.
Okay.
So I was part of the 5 farmers in every state that work part-time to work with FSA to hear farmer appeals and do some personnel stuff. So a lot of the staff, we've got hundreds of staff in all the counties around the state working for farmers through USDA. A lot of those employees also have a farm. Like one of their spouse or even themselves, they're farming in addition. That's American agriculture. And so we're really in that model. And our model is that we're building wealth. So over the last, we're on our 15th year, we haven't bought many groceries or paid much for insurance because we're pouring everything back into the farm. But we're building a lot of wealth. And that's the story of American agriculture, is over your lifetime, 40, 45, 50 years, if you can get in and start owning a piece of American farm ground, manage those cycles, you can come out at the other side with a significant amount of wealth and success. And my parents are an example of that. Our bank failed in the 80s crisis, barely held on, but rode those cycles and came out the other side. And so my parents owned 260 acres of Iowa farmland. My brother and sister-in-law were able to buy about 60 acres in 2 different pieces, and Pat and I are able to buy 110. That's the story of American agriculture. And all along we've seen times where we've had really good, smart public policy to help advance that, and then there's times where we see not so smart public policy that has a negative effect, or doesn't have the positive effect that's possible. And we know it's possible, and we're kind of living that here, and really thankful that we're able to do that.
Let me ask you something that your family's ownership of that bank, your family's ownership.
Well, no, my family didn't own the bank. My family borrowed from the bank.
Borrowed from the bank.
And
I'm sorry, and the bank failed. I'm sorry.
And like a lot of farmers in Iowa in the 80s, there was a number of banks that failed. There were a number of farms a lot of farms that got foreclosed on. It was a real crisis because when the bank failed, my parents didn't have a lender.
Got you. When you said their bank, I thought their bank.
No,
the bank from which they borrowed.
The bank from which they borrowed, and my parents were able then to move into USDA loan programs to save the farm. Yeah, smart public policy that helped us through that crisis.
Talk about that dynamic of, we hear a lot about farmers who are underwater in debt, who, in order to, you just gave us the example of the draft horse and the tractor, to invest in that next generation of technology, they've had to borrow a lot. There hasn't been the return because of lowering prices, weather, things beyond their control, and now we talk about these tariffs and trade policies of the president. What does that do to the ability to maintain ownership of a farm when you're so highly leveraged and you have these forces that are out of your control? What's the best response to that from the federal level?
Yeah, so the most important thing for a farm is where's your income streams coming from, and we have a lot of income coming into farming from the federal government, and now we're looking at $28 billion possibly coming in through these, bailouts for the failed trade policies. So that's these are potatoes. So if you kind of stay in the mode area, so income is really important, and so how is a farm generating cash that comes in? And a lot of that is sales, if you're growing something and selling it. But then there's also the public policy piece that comes in. And even in the super cycle from 2007 to 2013, when American agriculture was roaring, there were still federal dollars as part of that income stream. So it's the total package. And what we're seeing right now is that all of those income streams are down, except now we're throwing a whole bunch of money.
The bailout
money. But the future is really about how do you put together diverse income streams. And so that's why we're talking about the importance of paying farmers for environmental services, and particularly climate services, because that's where the big money's going to be, and the big problem. That's the biggest problem is climate change. We're seeing it all through the Midwest. Farmers can't get in the field. This hay is about 10 days past when it should have been cut. But like all farmers, we're dealing with these narrow windows of when we can do something. It causes a lot of stress. We're seeing farms that can't get into the field. So it is a matter of how do we create the income diverse, and the big opportunity in the future is to not only grow the products but to provide the services. So farmers can help fix climate change, and those dollars that are going to be available to solve that problem, if farmers can capture that, then we're going to be able to hold on to our farms. We're going to be able to pay off the loan. We're going to be able to make the investments like you're seeing on our farm we've been able to make.
What are some examples of that we may be able to see here? Environmental services that you're providing?
Yeah, so as we're walking, I want to get up here so we can see the pond, because that's a real tangible piece. So we're walking through, this diverse, some better than others, but this diverse grasslands or forages. So we took about 60 acres of crop ground and transitioned it into forages so we can manage grazed cattle. We took low-producing commodity ground, took it out of production so that we could do something different with it. Taxpayers helped us with an EQIP, Environmental Quality Improvement Program, that helped us with transitioning, for fencing, for putting in water lines, for building these 2 ponds that we built so that we had water, so that we can graze in smaller paddocks. And what was really great about that program at the time was not only cost share, but there were some incentive payments. In other words, because you've done this high-level environmental service, we're going to also give you additional money as an incentive. And so that's really a great model to help us get out of the crisis that we're in, both globally with climate change and locally here with the farming economy.
I love that.
So if you look here, you can see our pond.
Yeah.
We've got another one on over the hill. This whole piece in here was farm ground. Every year we rented a little bit less. So the first year we rented about 45 acres to a neighbor farmer, and then the next year less, as we put it all to seeding. And so by 2010, after 5 years of being on the farm, in 2010 we had the whole farm in our management. We had it all into the system. And it was really, we walked past the high tunnel, so if you look behind, you can see the plastic passive solar building. That was part of the EQIP program, so it helped us be more productive with our produce, again, to generate that income to be able to invest back into the farm. So we know how to do this. We have the policies in this country, unlike any other country in the world. We have policy, we have markets, we have the individual ownership of farmland, and we have the most amazing ability to solve problems on our farms. That's what we do. We're innovators. So the future has to be how do we shift from throwing money as band-aids to partnering with farmers to solve problems, so that we're not just getting production, but we're getting these services that the world's demanding. And we're seeing farmers are more and more interested in talking about being in a leadership position on climate and environmental services, and going into the next paradigm or the next farming system. Doesn't mean you tear it down and start over. It means you develop on what we have. The Green Revolution coming out of the 30s, it came out of where we were. It didn't start over. It built on it, and we're in that moment where we are ready to build going forward, and that's the opportunity. And if we stay where we are and we just keep putting band-aids on and we don't ask farmers to step up and get farmers into a leadership position, then that's the real crisis, because then we get stuck.
You've talked about paying farmers for environmental services and fulfilling two opportunities. One is meeting this global challenge of the planet's warming, and the warming that we're seeing right now is producing these floods that we've seen in this state, along the Missouri, we saw in Davenport, along the Mississippi.
The whole middle of the country right now.
Absolutely. But we know that what we're seeing now will pale in comparison to what we'll see going forward, unless we're able to do everything possible. And I love the way you talked about farmers, ranchers, rural communities being in the lead. And you've talked about this costing us as a country pennies per meal. When I look out at these trees here that aren't, it's on land that's not being cultivated for corn or soybeans, could that be an example of a conservation easement where we're going to ensure that farmer makes a profit on that land? We're capturing carbon that's in the air and sequestering it, more of it into the soil. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So there's five general practices areas. So the first one is energy. So farmers in Iowa led on wind energy. We were advocates for that. Senator Grassley, he's been a champion of the tax credits that were the smart public policy foundation with the markets built on top. We know how to do this. Farmers were really instrumental in developing that.
Another revenue stream for
Another
farmers
revenue
also.
Stream, absolutely, with those wind generators.
Yeah.
And methane digestion and solar is a big thing. The Iowa pork producers stepped up and beat back a kind of a power grab by the utilities to put an end to net metering with solar. A whole bunch of people worked on that. So farms can generate energy, and they've been system. So how do we use livestock to generate, environmental benefits?
Can you just talk a little bit about that? So when I'm driving down the road to come here to Coyote Run, and I'm passing these farms row after row after row, how do you integrate grazing within that row farming?
Right, so some of it is grazing. So you can graze back cover crops, which is another category, but you can see how these start to stack.
Yeah.
So there's 5 basic categories, and the farmers who are able to look at that and are incentivized to work through that and create a really robust system that solves all these problems, and they need to get paid for that.
Yeah.
As the innovators and the developers, and then as they actually performance-based. Like here's working with the land grants and extension to find the benchmarks so that we actually have the science around this to be able to say, look, this farm is producing this benefit and it has this value, so they deserve to get paid for that value. And so we start internalizing the benefits, where right now we externalize the costs, right? So there's a lot of costs to the systems that we have, both pollution and overproduction. Lots of costs that get externalized in the system. Nobody pays for that except essentially the public.
Right.
So we need to internalize those costs, the benefits, so that the value of that stays with the farm and the rural community. So back to your question about the grazing. It's not just grazing. It's how do you integrate. So in livestock production, you've got nutrients, the manure. Right now, we talk about it as a nutrient, as a benefit, but we're still managing it kind of as how do we get rid of the waste. So we're not getting the highest level of biological activity in the soil, et cetera, et cetera. And so livestock is huge, and we have to redevelop how we think about that. Doesn't mean we tear down all the livestock infrastructure and everybody stops eating meat, but it means we think about the livestock systems in a broader way, and not just let the costs of pollution and stuff be externalized. Then we've got something growing all year, so permaculture. Cover crops is a great example of that, and extending the crop rotation. So we've got not just corn on corn on corn, but we've got corn and beans. That's a better rotation. Corn and beans and small grains. That's an exponentially better rotation. Corn and beans and oats, small grain, alfalfa. You now have a spectacular rotation.
And farmers,
but
the
alfalfa has to go someplace, and so it goes to my own cattle or it goes to the neighbor's cattle, and so you start to see how you integrate these practices together. I think I hit all 5 of them. But conservation tillage. That's the other thing, is how do we disturb the land as little as possible? So
Can we start walking back and finish
Yeah.
walking?
yeah.
Yeah. I feel like we just got started, and then Amy, I mentioned that she grew up on a ranch, so she went straight to the horses.
Awesome, yeah.
And
So
she's with Pat.
at one point we had kind of we raised mules and sold them, and we kind of slowed that down. So we haven't been. We still have the remnants of that.
Amy, are you gonna ride?
So yeah, back to you.
Get Beto on the mule ride.
No, you said pennies a meal. I want to go back to that. Yeah. You thought about pennies a meal. So you did the math. Two pennies per meal by Americans. About $7 billion. If we put $7 billion of new money, or even move money that we're already spending into climate services, so that the land grants and the research is partnering with farmers to innovate around soil health and really how do we capture carbon, reduce emissions, and develop systems on our farm to get paid for it. I mean, $7 billion would be an enormous first step towards developing that. So that's pennies a meal. You know, if we could actually start to see the benefit, part of that 1/3 of the solution that the IPCC said that we're going to have to capture carbon, and most of that's going to be land management. Right. That's us. We manage land better than anybody on the planet in Iowa. I'm an Iowa farmer, but I mean, we know how to do this. So that's the pennies a meal. And so this is not a huge cost. It's a values, and it's a mental, and it's kind of a political policy framework that we're trying to engage all the candidates and across elected leaders. And I testified in Congress.
I saw it last month.
2 weeks ago, yesterday, at the Climate Crisis Committee, to talk about agriculture, to talk about this very thing. How do we pay farmers as part of the solution to climate? It makes farmers more resilient, but it actually even captures the carbon that provides the service. So it's a twofer, it's both resiliency and mitigation.